Hello, everyone. Welcome to week 4 of Education 200. Hope everything's been going great for you all. You all have been fantastic on the flip grids, on all the discussion boards, things like that. I'm going to spend the first 5 minutes on here just making sure we're all on the same page. One thing, we're kind of flowing into this, just a reminder with the flip grids, you're all doing great. If it happens to post as anything that says private or anything, don't worry about that. I can go right back through and activate it. As long as you get it posted, it's all good. Most importantly, more than anything, I know I say this every time, probably in every email, being an online class, if you have any questions, if you have any concerns, fire me an email. We can meet face to face, we can Zoom, we can communicate over email. A lot of you have been very good about doing this. It seems like you've been doing like cruising now that I guess a lot of online work for all your other classes and for this one. So it seems like everyone's kind of adapted. But again, if you have any issues, please do not hesitate to contact me. One thing before we really get going, I want to make sure we're on the same page with, and I did send an email out last week, but I want to make sure that we're kind of cool or we're all on the same page with. That's for a little bit later. I sent an email out related to service learning. Hopefully, you had a chance to kind of check that out. Obviously, with the Boys and Girls Club being out, I know I probably mentioned this last week, but I just want to make sure it's, again, just one of those things because I don't see you all regularly. You have some choices that you can make related to service learning. And actually, where did that go? There it is. I know this email went out, but just make sure you take a glance at this. You have a lot of options related to service learning. You have some videos that I've been putting up. I'm going to show you where those are here in 1 second. You can also do any type of tutoring. You can do any type of coaching. If you do anything with a church group, any type of thing like that where it is somehow connected to education, you are welcome. Check with me and make sure that it is okay. Most likely it is because we are being very flexible this semester. If you do not have any of those opportunities or you don't feel comfortable, I don't want anyone to go out if you feel like you risk anything with COVID or anything like that. I have been, if you look, putting up some videos on what we would call best practices in teaching. I have 5 of them up right now. Each one counts as an hour of service learning because by the time you take your notes, pause, maybe check it out and things like that, most of them are, I think, around 40-minute videos, maybe give or take. Each one will count an hour. I will have another 5 up probably in the next week or two. I just wanted to get some to get going. You can just log those in on the field log. I have posted the field log. I believe it is under week 2. I will make sure that it is up under resources also. If you have a field log from another class like 150, or if you're taking another education class and you like that log better, that's fine as long as you have the hours logged in and you have the person, if it's not one of these videos, that is in charge to initial it. So if you are doing tutoring and the tutoring service or the person that's having you do that, who just have them initial it. If you did 2 hours of tutoring, they just need to initial it. So I have verification. You will need to turn that in at the very end. The other thing that's very important with this, if you look on the syllabus of the breakdown for the service learning assignments, part of it is the field log, the 10 hours. By the way, if I didn't say that, 10 hours. You can see that, 10 hours. The other thing is you have to write a reaction paper. If you look at those questions, yes, it does reference Boys and Girls Club or Job Corps because that's usually the heart and soul of the class with the service learning. Just adapt them. Most of them are just asking questions like, what did you learn from this experience? Is there anything you would take or wouldn't do in your future teaching experiences? Did you have any goals when you came into this? Even watching the videos, there might be certain things that you're trying to find that you want to improve on. Could be classroom management, it could be communication, it could be planning, it could be preparation, it could be just anything. So, there's a little bit of leeway with how you want to interpret those questions. And again, if it references Boys and Girls Club, just adapt it to yours. But as always, if you have any questions, please email me. And just a reminder, service learning isn't due until the end of the class. So as long as you can get your 10 hours in before that, we're good. That, I think, is the major things. Oh, one other thing I did want to mention. The Taking Sides book. I had some emails this week, good emails, by the way. When I took over this class for Dr. Hannah, it was in the middle of August almost. the department had already put in the taking sides requests to the bookstore. Taking sides can sometimes be a little quirky, and they will have some expanded editions or an edition that might be slightly different than another edition. Don't sweat it. If I think there was this article 2 or 3 wasn't in the book that was offered at the bookstore, or some of the books from the bookstores, just email me. I will scan it and get it to you. They'll look better than this week's, which I actually put up this week, and I mean the week prior to this video. They'll look better than that. Our copier was having a little bit of issues, so I think the scanning was a little funky, so to speak. It looked like I saw the repairman in there working on it. It should be repaired. So if for some reason you don't see an article in the Taking Sides book, just tell me. I'll scan it and I'll post it up. I think I went through the books. I think everything should be good. That was just kind of a quirky one that popped up. I think most people had it in the book, but a few didn't. So, but again, that's the communication. That's the key thing. Flexibility and communication, the keys for the semester, I guess. With all that being said, we are going to look at week 4. Let me get this a little bigger screen for myself. This will obviously be moved up a little later. And we are going to talk today about constructivism. I will pull up some things. I'm going to jump back and forth here in a few minutes from some screens. I'll try not to get too bogged down. I will say this. I think constructivism is a much more relevant educational philosophy than like the behavioralists that we talked about last week. There's a couple of things that you can think about if you're going to compare the two. Behavioralism or behavioralists, they're a little more teacher-centered, I would say, in terms of approach. You know, you're trying to condition the students to do a certain thing. You're trying to make sure that they do this the way you want them to do. A constructivist is more the students have a firm investment in their learning. It's student-centered. If you're doing an interview, a key term that you probably always want to say is I'm a proponent of student-centered learning. I don't know if you are or aren't, but I would definitely say that you are when you're on interviewing, because it is definitely the more modern approach than being a little more teacher-centered. Not saying both don't have a role in life, but you know what I mean. So with all that being said, let me pull up this PowerPoint, and also just in case you need it, if I start talking a little fast or jump around a little bit, I've actually put up the major concepts right here that you'll need to take out of this. And of course, from the Ed Puzzle, there. Which again, gosh, I'm glad I put this on here. Ed Puzzle. I think I said this in an earlier video, but if you take an Ed Puzzle and you want another crack at it with a reset, just fire me an email. I'll reset it and you can retake it. Those are not there to harm your grade, flub up anything. Just say, hey, Dr. Allen, can I have another shot at this? Can I reset it? I will warn you, when I reset it, you have to do all the questions again, but I don't think the videos are more than 10 minutes, and you probably already know most of the answers anyway. So anyway, glad I saw that to tell you. But again, if you need it, and this is stuff that could potentially be on the midterm, and the midterm, again, will be like true, false, multiple choice, things like that. So, all right, I'm going to pull up the PowerPoint if you need it. PowerPoint is right there. I'm not going to claim that this is my PowerPoint. I got this from an educational site and kind of cleaned it up for our purposes on this video. And we're going to go. All right, constructivism. I kind of already mentioned this, but I think if you want to really think about what it is, it's just like a behavioralist or behavioralism type thing. With a behavioralist, the key word is behave. You're trying to control the behavior or the condition of the students. With a constructivism, you're trying to construct the student learning. It's rooted in something called in cognitive type theory. And if you were kind of looking, I'll look at my notes here because I wrote down some brilliant thoughts. But a cognitive learning is more when students you want students to have more engagement in the actual learning process, or you want them to be a partner in it. You don't want to just dominate it as a teacher. And constructivism is definitely rooted in that concept. I think this metaphor is probably a good example, and again, is a good base for where I think sometimes there's a problem in education and the issues with a lot of things. But if you look, you have a gentleman there, and he's looking into a student's head. And what is in the head? Well, nothing's in the head. That is never the case, ever. It's not going to happen. And I haven't mentioned him yet. We're going to talk about him, obviously, because he's kind of the godfather of modern education. But John Dewey is very famous for saying students aren't an empty vessel. when you get them, they know they've already had experiences, and that's what you want to build on or you want to construct from. We're going to talk about a concept called scaffolding. That's what you want to build on from students. If you look at the students, you're never going to have a student that's not had any type of life experience and probably be able to make connections to what you're talking about. And you don't want that. You want to build on their experiences and their strengths and things like that. So students are not empty vessels. They're going to have things in their head. I know that elementary students probably know this more than anyone in this class. And when you go out in the field, if you've been in and out for 150, students, when you bring up something, they're always going to say, oh yeah, my nana does that, or my pap does this, because they're making a connection. That's the constructivism. You're trying to build upon that already known experience or that experience that they've had. Again, they're not an empty vessel. I put a definition of learning. I think this is actually a nice cognitive type learning definition, but learning is an active process in which learners construct their own meaning based on prior knowledge and experience. And again, you're going just to expand that as the cognitive part, the students will be engaged in that learning or in that construction. Two guys that I think we're going to focus on the most today. There's another one I'll have a quote up for them, but these are the two I want to kind of lock in on today, are Piaget and Vygotsky. They're kind of I guess they're the pioneers or the godfathers of the constructivist movement. Piaget was Swiss. Both were actually born in Vygotsky was Russian. Both were born in 1896. I will say long-term Piaget has probably had more its influence, and mainly that's because Piaget actually lived to 1980. Vygotsky had a pretty short life. He actually passed away in 1934, so he's gone before World War II during the Great Depression. But they kind of had a similar thing where they felt like students, there's something to be said for the development of students. I'm going to actually show you a couple of videos here on both of them just to kind of give you an idea. But Piaget actually came up with something called, let me pull it up. Sorry, I meant to pull up the video. Stages of cognitive development. Sorry, I drew a brain blank there a little bit. Stages of cognitive development. And what I want you to see is this. This is what the stages of cognitive development are. And we'll talk about it here in a second. It makes, actually, when you see it, you're going to say, wow, why didn't I think of this? Or if I was around, I would have thought of this. And think about this when you've been out in the field.
Now, a long time ago, people used to think that children were just miniature versions of adults, and that they thought in pretty much the same way. But then this guy Piaget came along, and he figured out that children actually reason quite differently. In fact, he believes that children are actively constructing their understanding of the world as they grow, so that as their bodies grow, their minds grow as well. And he thought that this happened generally in different stages. So I want to tell you about Piaget's 4 stages of cognitive development.
And as she's saying, I won't interrupt her after this, but the stages of cognitive development, just in case you're wondering, it's going to be students' ages. So they've got them in a box. And she'll talk a little bit about some of the, how those ages aren't they're not concrete, so to speak.
So first, we start out with 0 to 2 years. And at this point, children are said to be in the sensory motor stage. So this word kind of makes sense. Sensory just comes from the senses. So he said children gather information about the world with their eyes, so through sight, smell, taste, hearing, and touch. So that's why whenever you see a baby 0 to 2 years, they're always touching stuff and putting it in their mouth. And then the motor part is that they are very active. As they discover how to use their senses, they also discover how to move their bodies around. And this helps them explore the world and learn what they're capable of. And the main task or awareness that develops during this time is object permanence. This just means that infants don't recognize that objects still exist, even though they can't see them. So for example, if you give an infant a toy or something, say you have a nice ball for them, and you take it away, they won't look for it because they don't understand that it still exists. So the next stage occurs from about age 2 to right around 6 or 7 years. Now, the reason I'm being a little wishy washy on the years is because these are really just general guidelines. It's not really hard and fast rules of when these stages happen. So, the next stage is the pre operational stage. And the operational part just means mental operation. So, imagining things or mentally reversing actions, things like that. And the thing to notice about this phase is that this is really when children start to develop and engage in pretend play, and they'll begin to be able to use symbols to represent things. What you might notice is that around age 2 is also when children learn to talk. And so, as they learn that words symbolize objects, that starts to help them into the pre operational stage and understand the idea of symbols. Children at this age are very egocentric. And that's not a bad thing. They're not just arrogant and bragging all the time. They just don't understand that other people have a different point of view than they do. So if you're ever watching TV with a child, like a 5-year-old, say, and they might sit down right in front of you and not understand that you can't see through them because they can see. Also, sometimes kids will try to hide from you at this stage by covering their eyes. The whole I can't see you, you can't see me idea. So then,
Just to kind of chime in on that, when she was talking about it in these stages of the development, if you're teaching, some things you might run into, especially because that's getting into more of our students' age, especially if you're in elementary. It's kind of that idea where maybe their students are playing with something or sharing something and they don't want to give it back, or they say they want it, it's mine. It's that egocentric. So, anyway, just to chime that in.
they get to about age 7 to about age 11 years old. Then they are in the concrete operational stage. And again, remember, operational means mental operations, and now they can do concrete operations. So, this is where children learn the idea of conservation. So, if you know a little kid and you want to see what stage of development they're in, then you can do this little test. It's pretty fun, it's easy. You take two identical glasses and pour the same amount of water in them and show them to the child and say which one has more. And kids will tell you they'll have the same amount. And then right in front of the child so that she sees you, you take one of those glasses and pour it into a short, fat glass. And then you take the other one and pour it into a tall, skinny glass. And then right away, ask the child again, okay, which one has more? And up until concrete operational, the child's going to say the tall, skinny glass has more because the water's higher. But once they reach the concrete operational stage and understand that the amount of water doesn't change just because the glasses are different sizes, then they'll tell you that they both still have the same amount of water, even though they look different. So that's a fun little test. And at this stage, children can also begin to reason about mathematics. So they'll be able to understand that 8 plus 4 equals 12, and then that must mean that 12 minus 4 equals 8. So moving on up, children from about age 12 and up are in what Piaget called formal operational stage. And that's when children are able to reason about abstract concepts and think about consequences of potential actions. So they're able to reason out what might occur. And also, Piaget thought that this was where really sophisticated moral reasoning began to take place. And at this point, children are reasoning more like adults, and they continue to develop that over time. Now, later developmentalists have come along and figured out that these stages aren't quite so discrete as Piaget may have originally thought. Children don't always develop these abilities within certain age brackets, but they do tend to progress in a predictable fashion. And thanks to Piaget, now we know that children are more than just miniature adults. So go find a child and see what stage they're in. Test Piaget's theory yourself.
And as you can see there, that's I'm just
Now,
gonna
one
play
time
there.
ago,
Whoops. As you can see there, that's what Piaget is probably most famous for, is that stages of cognitive development or social cognitive development. Another thing with Piaget, again, to kind of loop it back, that's a constructivist type idea. And also, I don't know if you saw it on my Nearpod here. This was one I had done for another class a little while ago. But as you can see there, he talked about that idea of open education. We talked about with cognitive learning, students have an investment in it, and you're talking about their shared experiences, and you want to build on students' experiences and things like that. It's student centered. One thing that kind of came out, and if I didn't, I thought I mentioned it, but if I didn't, I'm going to say it now. The 1960s were when Piaget's ideas really flourished. And that makes sense. It seems to be when a lot of things kind of change in the country and approaches to things. I'm a social studies person. I mean, that's really where my heart is and what my knowledge is in. And one thing about that is in the 60s, sociology kind of came into play a little more into the social studies field. I shouldn't say a little more, a lot more as far as our curriculum and things like that. Piaget's idea is that movement from teacher-centered learning, that behavioralist, like we're going to construct and we're going to have a condition, to more having the students have a little more freedom and say, I don't know how familiar you are with this. This is something I was going to put up a little earlier. And actually, I think the Ed Puzzle gets into it. The Montessori schools, that whole idea of student investment, open learning, that might be a little more open than what some of our public schools would want right now. But that's a big movement. And I think you can actually look back, that has a lot of Piaget type ideas. So what am I basically saying here? If you look on this slide, there's something about open education. I think you all probably have seen some of this, and I hate to say it's most extreme form, but definitely when Piaget's ideas were taking root. A lot of local schools used to be open concept schools or open schools. And I think a lot of the idea was that students would learn from their surroundings. They may even pick up things that they hear in other rooms and things like that. Of course, one that ended up happening is we built walls up, or schools built walls up, because it was almost a distraction. But that was kind of a Piaget type idea. Students would be able to construct things and build things from their surroundings and what they're hearing. There's still some around. I know I was over at Boonesboro Middle School back in the fall to do some observations. And they have the half walls, but you can still definitely hear what's going on in the other parts. If anyone's from around that area, Sharpsburg, Boonesboro, you know this. I believe the high school over there also was at one time an open concept, and they built the walls up. I know in the Eastern Panhandle schools like Valley View, I know at one time was an open concept. I haven't been in there in years. So I'm assuming it's got walls up. And I believe Rosemont might have actually been one too. We're talking in the 80s. I went to Valley View back in the 1980s, and it was an open concept. And what happened was the students built up co-trading on. With all that being said, it's still rooted in back in a Piaget type idea, that idea of open education and allowing students to kind of have experiences to build upon and hearing things and construct things. So that's Piaget. Now I'm going to jump back. I'm just going to actually close that out. And as you can see here, I'm going to go in there. Oh, there you go. Vygotsky is another person that is very associated with the constructivist movement. He is a Russian, and he is most famous where Piaget had the cognitive development stages that he came up with and is most associated with. Vygotsky, who, by the way, was a contemporary of Piaget, died, like I said, a little earlier. He was trying to expand. He liked Piaget's ideas. He was trying to expand or develop them even more. He came up with something called the zone of proximal development. And let me move my face out of the way there. I'm going to show you a nice thing called YouTube here, but I'm going to show you a short little video on what the zone of proximal development will be. By the way, I'll have both of these videos posted up on Sakai before this is actually all posted for week 4. But here you go.
Lev Vygotsky was a Russian developmental psychologist whose major contributions to the field and education occurred between the early 1920s and mid to late 1930s. While Vygotsky was only able to provide roughly a decade of work, his contributions are ever present in today's classrooms. As a developmental psychologist, Vygotsky focused a great deal on not only the development of children, but the learning processes involved with their development. According to Vygotsky, learning happens because we interact with the environment. Further, he believed that we do not learn because we have developed, rather, we develop because we have learned. In short, learning precedes development. Learning new things enhances our developmental level. However, in order to learn, we must be presented with tasks that are just out of reach of our present abilities. Tasks that are too simple or already within our present abilities do not promote learning. On the other hand, tasks that are too complex become frustrating and no learning occurs. Vygotsky believed that those tasks which are just beyond our present ability exist in what he called the zone of proximal development.
One way to think about that is that's the sweet spot for education when you're teaching. One thing, what I always think about with an example of this is, again, I was a social studies teacher. And if you think about Piaget a little bit in those stages, that's a big thing. Sixth grade is, most of them are 11 years old or give or take a year. And one thing that's part of the social studies standards in West Virginia was World War One. World War One has some pretty complex things, but it also has some things that I think students can easily understand, and they do understand. Usually when students come in, they kind of understand what a war is, hopefully. They kind of understand presidents and things like that. Well, what I would always try to do is we would look at the causes. Like, they might not know the causes of World War One when they come into my sixth grade class, but using things, and we're going to talk about scaffolding here in a few minutes, but we would use tools to kind of build upon that. And one thing I would do is I'd use an acronym called MAIN. It's a very common one. And the M, the A, the I, and the N were all the causes. And we would build upon that. And they would understand the causes of World War One when they got out of there. It was there. They didn't know it, but it was something they could build, and they can make the connections. Oh, this, because of nationalism, this is why this happened. Because of militarism, this is why this happened with World War One, and so on and so forth. Now, some of the stuff in World War One might be beyond their understanding, like Serbian politics that occurred and launched why Archduke Ferdinand was actually assassinated. That might be a little too far. But again, that basic idea of the causes and such kind of falls into that zone of proximal development sweet spot. So let me let this guy kind of say his thing again.
Tasks in the zone of proximal development are the things we can almost do ourselves, but need help from others to accomplish. After receiving help from others, we will eventually be able to do them on our own, thus shifting them out of our zone of proximal development. In other words, we have learned something. Here is an example. Little Johnny cannot swim. If he tried to teach himself to swim, he would most likely drown. However, if Johnny enlists the help of a swimming instructor, he will soon be able to learn to swim. In this scenario, swimming would be considered to be within Johnny's zone of proximal development. Why? Because it is a task he cannot accomplish on his own, but he can accomplish with the encouragement and guidance from someone else. Okay, so how does the concept of the zone of proximal development factor into the roles of today's teachers? Simple. The subject matter that teachers are going to teach our students falls within their zone of proximal development. Our students are able to learn the content. They just need guidance and encouragement from a teacher in order to do so. As teachers, we must be conscious of the fact that every student has a different zone of proximal development. In modern educational jargon, this means differentiation. Educators must design lesson plans that cater to the zone of proximal development for each of their students in order to avoid boredom and/or frustration in the classroom. The take-home message? Every student learns differently, but more importantly, every student can learn. They just need the help of a teacher.
And that's actually an important little thing that he said at the end. And one word you've probably heard in a couple of the videos already is that idea of scaffolding. And the thing about scaffolding is it's on there. Well, actually, why don't I just write this up right here? If you look here, scaffolding it's a part of all of this. It's part of constructivism. It's part of the zone of proximal development. It's part of the stages of cognitive development. When you're teaching, you're trying to construct. You're trying to build something. It's the concept connected to this movement. It's basically the support that you're giving to your students. So that support doesn't just have to be you sitting there and helping. It could be some sort of study aids. It could be things that you hang up around your classroom and you might refer to. It might be things that you post up on Google Classroom if you're doing virtual learning. It's the things you're helping to build that understanding in that sweet spot or that stages of cognitive development. This is all constructivism type things. Another thing you can kind of think about with this movement, let's see if I pulled the right one up. I have it up 2 times. If you look there, I'm going to just jump down here. Think about constructivism this way. If you ask someone to draw a house, if you have students, what's going to happen? You're going to get if you have 20 students, you're probably going to get 20 different looking houses. And why is that? Because our experiences that we've had in life are a little different. You know, some students might draw a house that might look like a box, have a flagpole and a bunch of windows and a porch. Some might draw a box with a chimney and going up. Some might draw something that's a little more like a rectangle. Some students may live in a boathouse. You don't know. So it's kind of our experiences. And some of this, also to kind of connect it back to those two videos that we just watched, you know, it might depend on the student's age and how much development they're putting into it and what they're doing. You know, that's all, it all connects. It's all part of that constructivism type movement. One thing I did want to add before we went into this, by the way, I'm gonna throw him up just because he's a big movement, especially in the more recent stuff. Is Bruner? He got into the idea of this cognitivism, the cognitive type thought process, and he was a big movement of bringing in these ideas in the classroom in the '60s, and the idea that we can't just do conditional type learning. I'm not going to read the whole quote to you, but what we're trying to do is we're trying to get students to think and be part of that process. Again, like I've said a million times, but knowing is a process, not a product. And I don't think I have it on here, and I might post this up if you want to see it. But last week we talked about the Skinner box and like how you're trying to condition students. And I saw something, and I think it was connected to Bruner, where in a Skinner box, the rat went up, and basically what the rat does is it learns to press a button. Which is right, it did. It was conditioned to push the button and then food would fall out. But what you're teaching it is the rat needs to push the button. The difference kind of between that and a constructivist type thing is if that rat was going through, a constructivist would think, all right, he's not pushing the button because he's been conditioned to push the button. He's pushing the button because that's where the food is. You're learning him, that's how he's going to survive. It's just a different way of looking at it, where before he was doing it because he had to. Now he's doing, a constructivist would look at it like, okay, he's learned that that's where the food is. And also you can even think about it if they were going through a maze of rat. Someone who was a behavioralist might say, well, he's just learned the pathway. He's been conditioned to walk this way. A constructivist might think about it this way. Well, he knows which way to go because he sees certain landmarks, and he's kind of put it together from experience that he needs to go this way. It's just, I think it's a next level type thing as far as education goes. You know, I was thinking, even I golf a lot, I'm in my house, as you can see. And if I play in a tournament, there's a lot of shared experiences go on. You might talk about the course, which just throw it in education. It's like if the students take a test, they might talk about it. We might compare notes as far as like how the greens read, or how the wind's blowing, or how maybe the fairway runs when the ball hits it, and the ball might go to the right or it might go to the left. These are all shared experiences. That's a constructivism type thing. So when I get done golfing and I talk to other players, that's, you know, we're sharing those shared experiences. That's constructivist type approach. So it's cognitive. You're learning from experience type thing. Oops. One thing I just want to share, and I might also put this up. I feel like sometimes I do an info dump, but you might want to just keep a little bit of this in mind, especially you science and math people. It seems like this pops up a lot. A lot of people use this thing called the 5 E's, this layout for their plans. It's engage, explore, explain, elaborate, and evaluate. This is a good setup for your lesson plans. You know, what are you going to do to engage your students? What are you going to explore? How are you going to explain it? How are you going to expand that knowledge of what you just explained? And of course, how you're going to evaluate or how you're going to assess it. We're not a planning course. I just thought I would share this. I think this is a very constructivist type approach, though. So with all that being said, I think that was the last slide. It is. And that one is a double. I don't know why I did that. Let's see if I can get that out of there. All right. So just to rehash, this week, you have an ed puzzle. You have a flip grid on this constructivist type approach. If I talk too fast or was babbling, don't worry. The videos are going to be up under the charts, and the charts are still there. I'll probably retitle this charts and videos. So if you want to go back through without me talking and watch those, that is fine. And if you need anything that I said rehashed, it is all right up there. PowerPoint is here. I hope everyone is having a good semester. And if you need me with any questions or assistance or help with anything, please, please, please email me. And I had mentioned on the service learning on one of the emails, I might be looking at doing a movie night. I think I have a date. I'm going to probably send that out this week. So be looking forward to that. Might even send out a little thing with related to times that might work for everyone. So I'm pretty open with those. So with all that being said, hope you're having a great semester, and I'll see you next week. Bye.